He came home early. The house was supposed to be silent. But as he stepped through the door, he heard something that didn't belong. Laughter, small footsteps, the sound of life. His jaw clenched, his heart tightened. Who brought children into his house? But when he stormed into the sitting room to confront the noise, 2 tiny boys ran straight into his arms. And in that one moment, something happened, something no one saw coming. The coldest man she'd ever known didn't step back. He didn't shout. He just stood there, holding the very thing he swore he'd never allow. And from that moment on, the mansion was never the same again. Stephanie Cole never planned to bring her children into that house. Not that day, not ever. But when her babysitter called in sick at 5:06 a.m., and the daycare said they were full, she had no choice. Rent was due, the fridge was half empty, and William Baker, the man she worked for, had one rule that echoed louder than any other. No children, not in this house, not even for a second. William's home was a fortress, a place of silence, of routine, of control. Perched above the Atlantic cliffs, the mansion was cold, beautiful but lifeless. People said he liked it that way. He'd fired staff over a dish left out of place. One woman got dismissed for lighting a scented candle, another for playing soft music in the kitchen. But Stephanie, she didn't break rules because she was careless. She broke them because she was desperate. So she packed snacks into the diaper bag, buckled her twins into the stroller and whispered, "Just stay quiet, okay? Just for today." She wheeled them through the side entrance. Her fingers trembled on the doorknob. And as the sun rose over the sea, she hid her sons in the laundry room, tucked between folded linens and cleaning supplies. She kissed their foreheads, set a phone with cartoons playing low, then she stood up straight and went back to work. She dusted the railings, polished the silver, mopped the marble floors with quiet, focused precision. Every few minutes she checked on them, every time she breathed a sigh of relief, until she heard it. Laughter. Not the cartoons, not the babies. Him, William Baker. He had come home early. What he saw next would break the silence he spent a lifetime building. But before we begin Chapter 1, I invite you to pause with me. Click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And as this story unfolds, may it remind you that God can use the smallest hands to soften the hardest hearts. That even in the coldest places, love still finds a way in. Now, take a breath. And let's begin. Stephanie Cole stood at the edge of the hallway, polishing the staircase banister like her life depended on it, because today, it did. Down the hall, her phone rested on a folded towel beside a mop bucket. Cartoons whispered from its speaker. 2 small boys giggled behind the cracked open door of the laundry room, hidden, tucked away like a secret she couldn't afford to lose. Her hands moved fast, but her mind stayed on them. Jacob had cried when she left him there, just a soft, whimpering sound. Joseph had reached out his arms. She didn't linger. She couldn't. She'd kissed their foreheads, whispered, "I'm sorry," and walked away. She hadn't even had time to pray. Just a breath, barely a sentence. "Lord, please, cover this." The East Wing was empty, just as it should be at this hour. William Baker was out of town on business, or so the staff had been told. Still, Stephanie worked in silence, moving like a ghost, listening for every creak of wood, every change in the air. And then, footsteps. Heavy, steady, male. Her heart clenched. No. No. Please not today. From the direction of the foyer came the unmistakable click of polished shoes on marble. She stood frozen, one hand still on the brass railing. William Baker didn't return without notice. He didn't shift schedules or show up unannounced. That wasn't how he moved through the world. But today, something had shifted. Stephanie turned slowly, her mind already racing. The laundry room door wasn't locked. The boys were just behind it, too close. She started forward, but then it happened. Laughter. A small, shrill, joyful sound, the kind only toddlers could make, followed by the deep rumble of something else. Another laugh. She stopped breathing. That voice didn't belong to her children. That laugh was his. Stephanie moved before she could think, half running, half praying, turning the corner into the sitting room like she was walking into judgment. And there he was, William Baker, tall, suited, powerful, on the floor, on the floor. One of her boys, Joseph, was crawling into his lap, sticky hands on the man's expensive shirt. Jacob was standing nearby, giggling as he pulled on William's silk tie like it was a toy. And William? He wasn't moving to stop them. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't calling for security. He was smiling. Not a smirk. Not forced. A real smile. Like it surprised even him. Stephanie's voice caught in her throat. She stepped forward. I can explain, she stammered, her voice cracking with guilt. William didn't look up at first. His eyes were on the child in his lap, who had just rested his cheek on the billionaire's chest like he belonged there. Then Jacob said it, soft, innocent, certain. Dada. Stephanie covered her mouth with both hands. Everything in the room stilled. The air changed. William blinked. The moment clung to him like dust in sunlight. Then he finally looked up. They called me Dada, he said, his voice quiet. Not confused, not amused, just struck. Stephanie couldn't move. Her knees felt weak. Her throat burned. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. My sitter, she cancelled. I didn't know what else to do. William still didn't speak. Joseph curled into his arms. Jacob sat beside him, humming a tune from the cartoon they'd been watching. And the man who had once said, I don't want children in my house, sat still, like he couldn't bear to move, like if he did, the moment might disappear. Stephanie didn't know what to do. Should she pick the boys up, apologize again, leave? But then William reached out, gently, and brushed a crumb from Jacob's chin. The gesture stopped her breath. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He looked like a man who hadn't held something soft in years. Light touch was foreign, but welcome. Then he said it. They're not a problem. 3 simple words. But when Stephanie heard them, something broke inside her. All the fear, all the pressure, all the silent prayers. She felt it crash through her like a wave she'd been holding back too long. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her eyes stung. And deep down, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time. Hope. Stephanie didn't sleep that night. Even after the boys had dozed off, curled like commas beneath their faded superhero blanket, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the guest quarters, trying to make sense of what had happened. Not once had William Baker mentioned the incident, not during dinner, not during his final walk through the hallways before bed, not when he passed her in the corridor with that same unreadable face. And yet, something in the house had shifted, not loudly, not with announcements or explanations, but quietly, like a small crack forming in a frozen lake. Stephanie noticed it first thing the next morning. The silver polish had been moved, not by much, just an inch or two, but beside it sat a folded towel. Fresh, warm, soft, the kind reserved for VIP guest rooms, and next to that, a note. No letterhead, no signature, just 2 words in sharp, clean handwriting. She stood there for a long time, holding the note in both hands, reading it again and again. She didn't know what it meant, not entirely, but she knew what it didn't mean. She hadn't been fired. The boys stirred behind her. Jacob coughed once. Joseph sat up, hair wild, still holding the stuffed lion he'd brought from home. Stephanie crossed the room and sat between them, pulling them both into her lap, her arms tight around their little bodies. They had no idea what yesterday had been, no idea how close she'd come to losing everything. All they knew was cartoons and crackers, and that a man in a suit had let them pull on his tie. "Be good today," she whispered into their hair. "Please be good." Downstairs, the morning ran quiet. No one spoke about what had happened. No one asked questions. But Stephanie could feel the air had changed. It was warmer, not by degrees, but by spirit. She kept to her routine, not daring to step out of line. She wiped windows, ironed napkins, fluffed the same throw pillows she'd fluffed 100 times before. And then she saw it. In the east sitting room, the one William rarely entered, there was a basket. Small, woven. Inside were toys, wooden blocks, a soft football, and 2 tiny pairs of socks. She didn't touch them, just stared. And behind her, a voice. Is that what toddlers play with now? She turned so quickly her heel nearly caught the rug. William stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, gaze casual, but too steady to be accidental. Stephanie swallowed. Yes, well, some do. He nodded once, as if storing that information. I wasn't sure. She hesitated. Mr. Baker. About yesterday. You don't need to explain, he said, cutting her off gently. Emergencies happen. She looked down at her hands, folded so tightly her knuckles ached. I was sure I'd be let go. You weren't. She waited for more. A condition, a warning. But he said nothing else. She glanced back at the basket. Did you put that there? William's eyes didn't follow hers. He looked out the window instead. I made a call last night, he said. I don't know what boys their age need. The woman on the line told me blocks are safe. Stephanie felt a lump rise in her throat. They're not a problem, he added again, as if repeating it made it more true. Or maybe, as if saying it aloud was something he needed to believe. She nodded. They're good boys. They just haven't had much stability. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a split second something flickered behind his eyes. A sadness, a memory, a weight he wasn't ready to name. They're not the only ones, he said softly, then turned and walked away. She stood there a moment longer, her heart echoing in her chest. Something was breaking open in him, not all at once, not fast, but like frost melting from a window, slow, quiet, and undeniable. The basket didn't move. Day after day it stayed in the corner of the east sitting room, untouched by staff, undisturbed by rules. Stephanie noticed it each morning as she passed through with her cleaning tray, a quiet reminder that something had changed, and no one knew what to call it yet. The boys were still hidden. She never left them unattended for long, but the fear, the tight pressing fear, had loosened its grip. They laughed freely now, even if only in whispers. They reached for her less, clung to her legs less. Something in them had softened too. William hadn't spoken to the boys again. Not directly, not since that day. But she caught glimpses of him, watching. Once from the top of the stairs as Jacob toddled across the tiled kitchen floor. Another time from behind the library doors, just barely ajar, as Joseph babbled nonsense to a teddy bear. He said nothing, but his silence no longer felt cold. It felt unsure, like a man walking through a room he hadn't entered in years, wondering if it's Stephanie didn't push, didn't thank him, didn't bring up that moment in the sitting room. Some things, she figured, were too fragile to name, but what she did notice, what she couldn't ignore, was his schedule. It changed. At first, she thought it was coincidence, then habit. But after a week of early returns, long pauses in the halls, and lingering footsteps near the laundry room, she realized he was staying close. Meetings were moved to Zoom. Suit jackets hung longer on chairs. Lunches arrived late but eaten at home. And the quiet places in the mansion, the ones that once echoed, began to fill with something else. Not noise, not chaos, but presence. One evening, just after dusk, Stephanie stood in the kitchen warming a bottle for Jacob. The lights were low. The house had settled. Joseph lay against her shoulder, feverish and restless. She rocked gently side to side, humming low, her voice cracked from the long day. She hadn't heard William come in. She didn't know he was there until she turned toward the stove and saw him, standing just past the doorway. No suit, no phone in hand. Just him, still, watching. She didn't flinch. She didn't explain. Maybe it was the dim light. Maybe it was the boy curled against her chest, or the warmth of the bottle pressed into her palm. But something in her posture said, "I am tired. I am doing my best. And I am not afraid of you anymore." William stepped forward. Not too close. Just enough to see. "He's warm," he said softly. Stephanie nodded, adjusting Joseph on her hip. "He spiked a little while ago. It's coming down." William's eyes dropped to the boy's face. Joseph's fingers twitched in sleep. A faint whimper escaped his lips. "Teeth?" William asked. "Probably." She smiled faintly. "Or just being two." He nodded like he understood, or wanted to, then glanced at the stove where the flame under the kettle still glowed blue. "You should sit," he said. She didn't. Silence filled the kitchen again, not tense, but stretched. And then William did something no one would have believed. He pulled out a chair, slowly, quietly. He pulled out a chair at the end of the table and sat down. No commands, no clipboard, no orders or inspections. Just a man, in a kitchen, with nothing to prove. Stephanie shifted her weight, Joseph still sleeping against her. She poured the warm milk into the bottle, screwed on the lid, and shook it gently in her hand. "I sing to them," she said quietly, almost without thinking. "When they're sick, when I don't know what else to do." William looked up. "Do you believe it helps?" Stephanie nodded. "Not always, but I think they know I'm there." He didn't respond, but he stayed. Long enough for the kettle to whistle. Long enough for the boy in her arms to breathe easier, and in the hush between them, something holy settled. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of comfort. The sound of walls cracking, and the steady ache of a man remembering what it feels like to simply stay. The first time Stephanie saw Amanda Rivers, she didn't know who she was. But the room changed when she entered, like the temperature dropped 1/2 degree. Like something delicate in the air had been pushed aside. She wore cream silk, tailored, pressed, effortless. Her heels didn't click on the marble. They whispered, and her perfume lingered longer than her smile. Stephanie had just come in from folding towels in the laundry wing, her ponytail messy, a faint smear of formula on her sleeve. She was about to turn into the main hallway when she heard it. Laughter, low and cultured, drifting through the open parlor doors. William's voice followed a moment later, quieter, harder to place. Curious, maybe more than she should have been, Stephanie stepped just close enough to see. Amanda was seated on the velvet chaise, one leg crossed over the other like she owned the room. William stood near the fireplace, drink in hand, his expression unreadable but polite. Stephanie didn't move. Not yet. Something about the woman's posture made her still. She watched as Amanda's eyes flicked toward William's cufflinks, her fingers brushing his wrist like she had done it 1,000 times. "I always said this house needed children," she said lightly. "It's too clean, too quiet." William didn't answer. Amanda smiled wider. "Don't look so surprised. I'm capable of softness when it suits me." Stephanie backed away before they noticed her, heart tapping harder in her chest than she liked to admit. Later that evening, the silence between her and William returned. Not cold, but distant. He passed her in the hall with a nod, nothing more. No words about the boys, no chair pulled out in the kitchen. Just a brief glance, then gone. 2 days passed. Amanda stayed. No explanation, no mention of her arrival. But her shoes appeared at the front door, her bags in the guest wing, her presence in the air, always a little too fragrant, a little too loud. Stephanie stayed out of the way. She woke early, fed the twins, kept to her duties. She didn't ask questions. She didn't have the right. But her stomach stayed tight, not from jealousy, not exactly. It was more fear. Fear of whatever Amanda had once been to William. Fear of what she might still be. Fear that the fragile softness Stephanie had seen in him, that quiet man in the kitchen, might not survive this kind of woman. Amanda found her in the West Hall one afternoon, wiping down the window panes. "I've heard about you," she said. Stephanie looked up. "Sorry?" Amanda tilted her head, that silk blouse draped perfectly across her shoulders. "The maid with twins," she said, like it was a story she'd already decided the ending to. "Must be exhausting." Stephanie straightened. "They're a gift." Amanda smiled thinly. "Of course." She paused, then added, "I suppose William's been feeling generous lately." Stephanie said nothing. She didn't need to. Some words weren't meant to be answered, just endured. Amanda's gaze drifted to the hallway behind her. "This house used to run like a museum. Now I hear lullabies in the walls." She turned without waiting for a reply. That night, William stood by the front windows long after dinner had ended. Stephanie passed through with a laundry basket, paused just long enough to see him staring into the dark. She almost kept walking, but something made her stop. "I didn't know she was coming," she said gently. William didn't turn. Neither did I. Silence filled the space between them, thick, honest, a little tired. "She seems familiar," Stephanie added carefully. "She's part of an older life," he said, "the kind that looks good in pictures but never fit in the frame." Stephanie swallowed. She didn't know if that was supposed to comfort her, but it did, in a quiet, aching way. She nodded, shifted the basket in her hands and walked away. But William's voice came behind her, softer now. "I see what this house used to be. When she's here." He paused. "And what it is becoming when you are." It started with a whisper. Not a scream, not an accusation. Just a question, asked too quietly in the wrong hallway, and heard by the wrong person. "Has anyone seen the Baker clock?" That's all it took. The clock in question sat on a mantel in William's private study, antique, hand-carved, passed down through 3 generations, not loud, not grand, but rare, priceless, sentimental, and now, gone. Stephanie hadn't even known it existed until the estate manager came looking for it. He asked once, then twice, then with sharper eyes. She was in the kitchen with Joseph on her hip when the manager entered, his voice polite, too polite. "Miss Cole, have you seen anything unusual this week?" She shook her head. "No." He smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Just making sure all's in order." He turned to leave, then glanced over his shoulder. "Oh, lovely boy. I imagine twins are curious, into everything." Stephanie blinked. Her chest tightened just slightly. "I keep them close," she said calmly. "They don't go near the study." He nodded, said nothing more. But something changed in the air after that. By evening, the staff had grown quieter. Doors that used to stay open now clicked shut behind her. Polite greetings turned into brief nods, and when she entered the dining hall to clear plates, 2 maids stopped talking altogether. She knew that silence. She'd grown up with it. The kind that doesn't accuse you to your face, just leaves you to feel guilty in the room. That night she passed William in the hall. He didn't stop, didn't speak. She told herself he was just tired, busy, distracted. But still, he didn't look at her. The next morning her locker had been opened. Not broken, not forced, just opened. A few of the boys' toys were moved. A framed photo of her mother lay face down on the bench. Stephanie stared at it for a long time, her hands trembling as she picked it up. This wasn't an accident, it was a warning, a quiet, careful message. She wanted to cry, she didn't. Instead, she gathered her things, zipped her bag, and went to William's office. He wasn't there. She left a note on his desk, no anger, no emotion, just the truth. "I didn't take it, but I know why it's easier to believe I did." Then she walked out. No scenes, no explanations, just one hand holding Jacob's, the other carrying Joseph against her chest. As she stepped out through the side entrance, she paused once just to look back. The mansion stood still, tall and clean and cold. The house that had begun to feel almost warm. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't expect anyone to notice. 3 days passed. She stayed inside her small apartment, curtains half closed, trying to stretch groceries one day further. She sang lullabies at night, not to calm the boys, but to keep her own hands steady. There was no call, no message, no update. And then, on the third afternoon, as she was folding laundry on the living room floor, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, but certain. She opened it with Joseph still in her arms. William Baker stood on the porch. No driver, no staff, just him. He held two things in his hands. One, the antique clock, the other, her note. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes tired. "I found it," he said softly. She nodded once. "Where?" "Under the piano," he replied. "Rolled back into the corner. One of the boys must have knocked it over." She waited. He shifted the clock in his hands. "I believed them," he added, voice lower now. "Even for a second, that's on me." Stephanie looked down. Her throat burned. He didn't ask. He just sat, right there on the stoop, with the clock in his lap and the weight of what he'd let happen still sitting on his shoulders. The boys peeked around the doorway. Jacob smiled. "Hi," he said softly. William looked up at him and smiled back. Not wide, not easy, but real. Stephanie stepped aside. "I didn't invite you in," she said gently. "I know," he replied. "I'm fine right here." And so he stayed, quiet, still, steady. Not to explain, not to fix, but just to be near. Until the silence began to feel safe again. The house felt wrong without them. Not silent, wrong. William walked the halls the next morning and realized how loud silence could be when you've tasted something better. He could still hear their laughter in the corners of the rooms, not as sound but as memory, as absence. The laundry room was too clean, the towels too tightly folded, the air too sharp. He found himself pausing outside the guest quarters. He knew they were empty, but his hand still hovered over the doorknob for a moment longer than it should have. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The warmth was gone. The estate manager returned the clock that afternoon, polished, untouched. He set it carefully on the study mantel, the way he had years ago when William first inherited the house. "It was just a misunderstanding," he said. William didn't answer. The man cleared his throat. "The boys must have knocked it over by accident." Still, no reply. He shifted awkwardly. "We're lucky it wasn't broken." William turned to face him. "No," he said quietly. "We're not lucky." The estate manager blinked. "Sir?" William looked away, jaw tight. She left thinking this house would rather believe a lie than see her clearly. "That's not luck." The man had no answer for that. He left without another word. That evening, William sat alone in the kitchen. He hadn't eaten. The kettle boiled once, then twice. He didn't move to pour the water. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the note. Her handwriting, still folded, still sharp around the edges. "I didn't take it, but I know why it's easier to believe I did." He read it again, and again, and again. He walked the house that night, not as an owner, but as a man searching for something he couldn't name. He paused in the east sitting room, where the basket still sat untouched. One of the socks had fallen to the floor. He bent down and picked it up. Tiny, soft, worn at the heel. He stared at it for a long time, his fingers curling around the fabric. No one told him to keep it, but he did. By the next morning he couldn't stay still. He drove for the first time in months. No driver, no schedule, just him. The roads blurred past the windows, grey and cold, and still somehow too bright. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring gifts, just the sock and her note. Stephanie opened the door slowly. She didn't look surprised to see him, just tired. He held up the sock without a word. Joseph's, then her note. "I kept it," he said quietly. She looked down at both, her hand still resting on the doorknob. "I wasn't expecting you," she said. "I wasn't expecting anything," he admitted. He looked at her, truly looked. No distance, no defense. "I let them believe something about you I knew wasn't true," he said. "Even for a second." She didn't speak. Didn't need to. He continued. "You were the only one in that house who saw what it could be, not what it was, what it could be, and I didn't protect that." The boys were behind her, sitting on the living room floor, their small voices drifting faintly into the silence. William glanced past her for a moment, then looked back. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said, "but I needed to tell you." "You were right." Stephanie's voice was soft. "About what?" He swallowed hard. "That some houses echo because they're empty, and some because they're waiting for something worth holding." He didn't ask to come in. He didn't need to. He sat on the porch again like he had before, not demanding, not fixing, just present. And this time, Stephanie didn't close the door. She sat beside him. The wind moved quietly around them. Two people, no titles, no power. Just truth sitting between them, finally spoken. They didn't speak much that night. Stephanie sat beside William on the porch, her sweater pulled tight around her shoulders, his coat folded across his lap. The air was cool but quiet. Still, the kind of quiet that doesn't rush you. Inside, the twins were asleep, their breathing soft against the hum of the fridge. From where they sat, the house behind her and the street in front of them felt like two different worlds. Stephanie didn't ask why he came, not again. She already knew, and William didn't try to explain anything further. His silence didn't feel like distance this time. It felt like a man carrying the weight of words he hadn't learned how to say yet. After nearly an hour he stood, not abruptly, just enough to stretch his legs and tuck the small sock back into his coat pocket. Before he left, he turned to her. "I have an idea," he said. "It may be too late, but if it isn't..." He paused. "I want to show you something." He came back the next day, this time not with a clock, not with a note, with blueprints, literal ones, folded into a leather binder, corners softened by wear. He laid them out on the kitchen table of her small apartment like they were sacred. And maybe they were. She stood at the counter, drying a bottle, watching him. He didn't look at her as he opened the pages. "There's a spare wing," he said, "south end of the mansion. It was designed for guests, but no one uses it. Too far from the elevators. Too quiet." He looked up now. "I want to turn it into something else. A nursery. A family space. Not just for your boys. For any staff with children. If they ever need it." Stephanie didn't move, didn't speak. "I don't know how to build a place like that," he continued. "Not really. But you do." He slid the pen across the table. "Draw with me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was an invitation. One only made by someone who finally sees what's missing, and who can help make it whole. Stephanie stepped closer. Her hands still smelled faintly of dish soap. She looked down at the paper, at the blank space marked interior vision, and something in her heart pulled. "You want cribs?" she asked, voice quiet. He nodded. "Bookshelves?" "Yes." She picked up the pen slowly. "Stars on the ceiling," she added. "So kids feel like they're sleeping under the sky." He didn't smile, but his shoulders eased, just slightly. She began to sketch. Windows, rugs, a corner for puzzles, a couch that could unfold into a bed. William watched her hand move, and then, for the first time in days, he exhaled. Later that evening they stood at the mansion's side entrance. Stephanie hadn't stepped foot back inside since she left. She hesitated. William opened the door for her, then stepped aside. No pressure, just presence. Inside, the halls were lit low, warm, golden light casting soft shadows on the floor. Everything was the same, but not. The silence had changed. As she stepped in, she glanced toward the east wing. The basket was still there, and beside it now, a folded blanket and a small wooden truck. Her throat caught. "They still fit here," he said beside her. "They always did, I just didn't know it." That night, Joseph curled up in her lap on the staff lounge couch, and Jacob crawled toward William, who knelt, not flinching, not freezing. Jacob held out a crayon. "Draw," he said. William took it, and drew a crooked sun in the corner of the blueprint. Stephanie didn't laugh, but she smiled. He looked up. "You don't have to forgive me," he said, "but I want to build something that says, 'I see you now. All of you.'" She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just reached out, not for his hand, but for the pen. And together they kept drawing, not because everything was fixed, but because something, finally, was beginning. The mansion didn't feel like the same house. It wasn't louder, not really. It was warmer, like something invisible had finally started breathing. Doors that once closed themselves were now left open. Laughter drifted faintly from the east wing, and toys no longer disappeared when someone important entered the room. Stephanie walked those halls differently now, still careful, still quiet, but no longer unseen. The nursery wing was under construction. The blueprints she'd drawn with William were slowly becoming walls and beams and built-in bookshelves. Every day, something new was added. But healing moved slower than hammers. Amanda left without a scene. She stood in the foyer in another silk coat, her driver waiting outside, her heels echoing as she turned toward William with a smile too sharp to be kind. "I'll admit," she said, eyes flicking toward the sound of children laughing down the hall, "this wasn't the story I expected for you." William stayed still. "Children, maids, crayons on your conference table?" She tilted her head. "You're changing, Will. But is that you?" He didn't flinch. "I don't know who I used to be," he replied. "But I know who I'm not anymore." Amanda smirked. "Then let's see how long she lasts." She didn't wait for a goodbye. William didn't offer one. The front door closed. And just like that, a part of the past walked out and didn't come back. At the ribbon cutting for the new nursery, the staff gathered in soft murmurs, unsure of the moment, unsure if they were still working or witnessing something sacred. Stephanie stood near the back, the boys at her side, Jacob tugging at her sleeve, Joseph clapping at nothing in particular. William stepped up without a microphone. He cleared his throat and spoke not to the room but to the people. "This house used to echo," he said. "Now it breathes." There was a pause. "Because of them," he added. "Because of her." The staff turned slowly toward Stephanie. She didn't step forward. She didn't need to. Her eyes stung with something too full to explain. That night, after the boys were asleep, she stood in the kitchen rinsing bottles under warm water. Her hands moved without thought, muscle memory and motherhood stitched together. William walked in quietly, holding 2 mugs, 1 coffee, 1 tea, unsure which she preferred. He set them beside her without a word. She didn't look up right away, just finished rinsing the last bottle, placed it on the rack and turned to him slowly. His voice was quiet, not rushed, not rehearsed. "You don't have to go," he said. Stephanie froze, not in fear, in wait. He wasn't asking, he wasn't begging, he was simply offering. "You don't have to stay either," he added, "but if you do, you won't have to wonder anymore." She didn't answer right away. The silence between them wasn't cold this time. It was sacred, like neither wanted to speak too soon and scare it all away. Then, slowly, she reached across the counter and rested her hand over his. Not tightly, not dramatically, just enough. Enough to say she heard him. Enough to say she wasn't running. He closed his eyes for half a second, just long enough to breathe. And in that quiet kitchen, with the hum of the refrigerator and the drip of a leaky faucet, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't romance. Not yet. But it was trust, returning to the place where it had once been broken. Later that night, William passed the nursery wing alone. The walls were up now. The ceiling painted a deep midnight blue, tiny gold stars scattered across it, just like she'd drawn. He walked in slowly. The room smelled of fresh paint and possibility. In the corner sat a soft chair, wide enough for 2 small boys. He imagined them there, wrapped in blankets, babbling in half-sleep. He sat down. The stars above him didn't move, but something inside him did. He rested his hand on the armrest, closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long, long time, he felt like he wasn't waiting for something to end, but for something to begin. The morning sun poured into the nursery like it belonged there. It touched every corner, the soft chairs, the storybooks, the shelves lined with little shoes and stuffed animals. The stars on the ceiling caught it too, gold flecks glowing faintly in the light. Jacob and Joseph were already awake, their tiny feet padding across the rug as they chased each other in a slow, sleepy blur. Stephanie leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them, not as a maid, not as a guest, but as their mother, finally breathing in a place that welcomed them. Behind her, William approached with a quiet step. No suit today, no phone in hand, just a mug of coffee and a pair of baby socks tucked into his back pocket, one red, one blue. He stood beside her, silent. She didn't speak either. There was nothing urgent to say, and maybe that was the miracle of it all. They had reached a place where quiet no longer meant distance. Later that afternoon, Stephanie walked past the old study and found William kneeling beside a low cabinet, picking up crayons from under the table. He held up a broken green one. "Joseph's," he said. "He bites the tips off." Stephanie smiled. "He thinks they're candy." William stood, rubbing the back of his neck. "I used to think messes meant something was broken," he said. "Now I think it just means something's alive." She looked at him for a moment, longer than usual. "You used to keep this place spotless," she said. He nodded. "It didn't feel like mine then. Not really." She stepped forward and reached behind the leg of the couch, pulling out a pacifier. "Looks like we missed one," she said. William took it from her hand gently, not because it was fragile, but because the moment was. Then he held her gaze. "You've made this house something I didn't think it could be," he said. Stephanie didn't look away. "You stayed," she whispered, his voice lowered. "So did you." That evening, a small staff celebration was held in the garden, not formal, not lavish, just lanterns strung between trees and sandwiches passed on paper plates. The twins ran barefoot in the grass. Stephanie sat on a bench with a glass of lemonade in hand, and William, of all people, stood beside the grill, laughing at something the gardener said. It felt surreal. It felt earned. Later, as the sky dimmed and children yawned into their mother's arms, William rose to say a few words. No speech in hand, just his heart in his throat. "This house used to echo," he said softly. "Now it breathes." He looked at the twins tumbling in the grass, then at Stephanie, her eyes shining with something steady. "Because of them," he added. "Because of her." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Some truths live better in silence. That night, as the house settled into its new rhythm, Stephanie stood in the kitchen rinsing bottles, her hands moving slow and peaceful. William walked in quietly, mug in hand, sleeves rolled up. He set the mug beside her. "You don't have to go," he said again. But this time, it didn't sound like an invitation. It sounded like home. Stephanie didn't speak. She simply turned off the tap, dried her hands, and rested one palm over his on the counter. It was enough. Weeks later, she found a photo on the nightstand. It hadn't been there the day before. It was framed simply, nothing fancy. Just a snapshot of William lying on the nursery floor, his tie half loosened, the boys sprawled across his chest in tangled joy. She blinked back tears she didn't expect. On the back, in small handwriting, were just 7 words. "Some homes are built from people first," and that's how it ended. Not with a kiss, not with a perfect line, but with a house that used to echo, now filled with footsteps, laughter, lullabies and grace. A man who had once shut the world out, now pausing to tie tiny sneakers before billion-dollar calls. A mother who once hid her children behind detergent bottles, now humming as she walks them to breakfast, no longer afraid. Not a fairy tale, but something better. Home.